All right. Well, welcome everybody. I am very excited for our didactic portion today. Megan Wiebelhaus, who has been one of our consult participants since the very beginning, is going to be sharing with us today. So Megan specializes in ADHD, autism, giftedness, preferably all three at one time. In her private practice, serving teens and adults. In her 7 years of mental health, Megan has been a neurodivergence coach and even led Dungeons and Dragons social skills groups, worked with folks struggling with addiction, and supported foster care kids and their caregivers. Megan presents on subjects ranging from executive function and assertiveness skills to her How to Fight with Your Therapist talk, educating clinicians on rupture and repair and therapy. Megan has presented at the UW Autism Center, Ryther, Seattle Public Schools, and group practices in the Seattle area. Megan, thank you so much for being here today. While Megan is presenting, um, I just want to set up expectations for the structure. So there will be periods throughout where Megan's going to invite responses. If you're comfortable popping in on the recording and sharing verbally, you'll be invited to do so. But if you want to remain anonymous on the recording, if you put your response or your question in the chat, I'll read it out without your name. If you have additional questions, you can pop them into the chat and those will be addressed at the end. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Megan. Thank you so much.
Right. Thanks, Ellie. I want to thank Ellie for helping with the coordination here, and also to Holistic Child and Family. I was here at the first meeting of this consult group, and Ellie was telling me that was like February 2 years ago. Right. So this is a long-standing community, and it's helped me so much, right, over the years, and I'm happy to present today. Especially see some familiar faces. Also, Zach Seidik only just found out how to pronounce my last name. It's Wiebelhaus. It's Wiebelhaus, Zach. It's Wiebelhaus. All right, so I'm about to turn on the PowerPoint. I am like viscerally against PowerPoint for so many reasons. The executive function demand alone is terrible, but it is a good way of getting like words in front of you. Makes it less interactive. So I'm not going to be able to see your guys' faces when I've got the PowerPoint up, but I'll still be like asking for your input, right, as you're comfortable. So there's going to be points where like we're all going to share together some like right answers to things and right, I'll welcome you to do that. Just know that I won't see your face at all, so I'll just nod as though you're nodding and we'll just do that together. All right, so today's presentation is on shame, right? Super fun times subject, but it is something that comes up a lot for our clients. It comes up a lot for us, and so let's get into that. Get into that PowerPoint that I don't believe in. Here we go. All right, being as there we go. All right. Shame identification and resilience for therapists. So let's move forward here. This is largely drawn from Brene Brown's curriculum that she developed way back in the day, like I think 2010. And she was working in a women's centers, right? And I think this is pre TED Talk, Brene Brown, I think. And so this is her early material. Um, and let's see. And I used to present this or teach this in psychoeducational groups in eating disorder facilities. Okay, so that was one of my first like mental health jobs. Worked in an adult residential facility and a teen residential facility. And I did this psychoeducational group at both. So I did this twice a week for like almost a year, right? So this was formative part of my therapeutic training. And I also got to see how little it's talked about, right? And how important it was to people to kind of learn, oh, that's what that feeling is, right? Oh, right? That's what that feeling is. Okay, so um, we'll say this. So Brene Brown gets a little directive in the introduction to this, in the like how to present this material. She's very clear that you're not to lead this group without having done the worksheets yourself, right? You may not like present this, you may not like lead groups unless you've actually done this work yourself, right? Because it is so, as the quote says, it's there's no us in them. So as you'll see here, the quote says, "I've found shame to be a difficult and painful topic for both lay people and mental health professionals. Unlike many of the other topics that professionals study when it comes to shame, there is no us in them, right? There is no my clients and me, but I don't have this, but my clients do, right? It's just that we have shame, right? The thought is that there's basically no human beings that don't experience shame. Um, okay. Before we go into what shame is, right, I want to talk about why this talk is slightly different than advertised, right? So this was like advertised on the email, right, as shame and neurodivergence, right? And part of that is because in presenting this to another group practice, right, I presented it to largely neurotypical clinicians, right? And so this talk was about like shame resilience and shame reduction. And it was written in like big, bold letters about, right, the shame reducing impact of getting an accurate diagnosis, which allows you to get accommodation and community normalization, right? Like it was a big banner of like, neurodiversity has this impact, especially when you don't know that's what's going on, right? That's an extra layer of being different, right? And then like not knowing why, and then struggling really hard, right? And so it was a real big pitch for like, right, accurate diagnosis and such like that. But this group knows all that, right? This group are probably made up of the people who educate other clinicians on this subject, right? Like that's this what this group is kind of like, this who's here, right? And I was thinking that my goal, right, for this, the ultimate goal is that our neurodiverse clients are okay, right? They're okay. And the thing I have to offer here is about shame resilience, which can be really helpful for humans, particularly neurodiverse humans. The way that they can be more okay, is my thought, right, is that if we as clinicians, right, are a little bit more okay, right? And the thing I have to offer is on shame identification and resilience for us, right? Right. Basically, if we're able to know our shame triggers, right, and able to speak our shame and get the empathy and connection that we need, right, we'll just be able to help our clients do it, right? As we'll see here in a second, like shame is a feeling. So they don't often, I don't, actually someone could tell me, but it's shame is not as focused on the feelings wheel. Actually, the feelings wheels are pretty good. In elementary school, the feelings boards don't as often have shame on it. We don't talk about it as much. We say happy, sad, depressed, anxious. Shame is a big feeling, right? But it's just a feeling, right? So this is, right, we're going to talk about feeling identification, right? We're going to talk about, right, critical awareness. We're going to talk about how to like relieve, right, the pain of that feeling. Okay. There it is. There you go. So that's Brene Brown's right definition from like 2010, right? Shame is best understood as a psychosocial cultural construct. It is best defined as the intensely painful feeling, right? So intensely painful feeling or experience of believing we are flawed and therefore unworthy of acceptance and belonging, right? And that's just what we're going to be talking about, right? It's a painful feeling. It's a belief that we're flawed. There's something wrong with us. There's something wrong with me, right? There's something wrong, right? And because there's something wrong with me, I don't deserve my people, right? I don't deserve any people. I don't deserve that partner. I don't deserve, there's something wrong with me and I'm unworthy of acceptance or belonging, right? Okay. The nice news is, right? That intensely painful feeling that we all have, right? Time to time. The answer, right, is connection, right? It's connection that helps us overcome shame. Remember, shame is the fear of disconnection, right? So we're going to talk about connection, right? And how to find it when we feel unconnectable, if you will, right? When we feel that we don't deserve connection, right? So let's talk about that a little bit, right? And what we're gonna do is we're going to essentially not install a thing, but we're gonna kind of focus in on a feeling, right? We're gonna focus in on an experience that we can come back to after we've talked about shame, right? We're going to think about times where we did feel loved, connected, right? Secure, accepted, right? Like when we felt okay, right? And then we'll just kind of harken back to that after we talk about shame, right? I find that shame bears some buffering, right? Even in a didactics here, right? It bears some buffering. So I'm going to ask you, right? We're going to take a deep breath and then we're going to think of the last time. Maybe it was 5 minutes ago, maybe it was 5 weeks ago, when you felt good with another person, right? Good with another person. So that would be, you didn't have to perform. You didn't feel like some element of yourself was in question or needed to be kind of defended, right? You were kind of good, right? So I'm going to have us take a deep breath and we're going to take a few minutes to think about the last time we felt kind of connected. So take a deep breath. Let's take about 10, 15 seconds. Okay. Okay. Hold that idea in mind, right? And for those of you who felt that in your body, right, you may want to register where you felt that in your body or an absence. I noticed that my shoulders aren't as tight, right? It's an absence of tension, right? Some of you might feel that in your heart, right? In your face, right? Shoulders, legs, the rest of your body, right? So we'll come back to that memory. If you have a name for that memory, it can also help solidify it a little bit. So if you have a name for cuddling with my preschooler on the couch watching Spidey and his amazing friends, right? That's right. Come back to that. Okay. Shame resilience. Okay. Kind of jumping to the end before, like we were to how let's assume we have this feeling. How are we resilient? Let's go forward. Shame resilience. It's 4 attributes which can be developed. It's nice, right? This can be developed. One is the ability to recognize and understand your shame triggers. Right? So we'll look at those. High levels of critical awareness about your personal shame web. And then she'll explain that language. Right? The willingness to reach out to others when you experience shame. Okay. Right? That can be logistically difficult or personally difficult, right? The ability to speak shame, to describe your experience of it to another person. Okay, so we're going to go through these. Right? So let's look at triggers, right, and personal shame webs. Okay. So the idea of shame, right, is that Brene Brown broke like shame categories, shame identities, right? Again, working with women, Texas, around 2010, right? She created 12. I think there's at least one should be for neurodiversity, right? I think there's a whole bunch, right, in here. But the shame category she identified at the time: appearance and body image, money and work, parenthood, family. Actually, no, I take that back. It's motherhood, fatherhood, and then parenting is below. So you get that, you get 2 of those. Mental and physical health, including addiction, sex, aging, religion, speaking out, surviving trauma, and being stereotyped and labeled. Okay, right. What I want to do, because we are therapists, we're all here, right? And because there's this extra niceness of like if we are able to talk about a little bit of our own like shame triggers here in this group, the nice thing is that we can also, right, get some of the empathy and the not aloneness, right, in this group. And that's what we offer our clients, right? It's the not aloneness, right, in our stories. So we're going to actually focus in, for the sake of this presentation, we're going to focus in on the second one. We're going to focus in on money and work and say that's the kind of the therapist-y category for the moment. Being a therapist can show up in a lot of these, right? But we'll say the money and work category, right? Now, Brene Brown was developing this right a while ago, right? And she breaks down the way shame feels and the way we can feel caught in shame by gender, right? So she said this is the femme experience of shame. This is the masculine experience of shame. I think at this distance of time, I think that would probably be presented in a different way, right? This is how she presents it at the time. You can also notice the distance of time because the first thing, right, on that web there we see for Brene Brown's idea of like the femme experience of shame is magazines, right? Because we all read those so often now. Right. But there's how you should be as part of this web of shame, right? What you should be, who you should be, right? And the influences, the messaging, the cultural DNA, right? That we kind of experience, right? Which changes from generation to generation, right? We see the how you should be from, in this case, social media, right? There's colleagues, there's marketing, an insidious version, right? Membership groups, teachers, books, right? And this is part of the critical awareness of shame, right? This is the purveyors of ideal identities, right? And also purveyors of unideal identities. So that's her idea for femme folks. Her idea for masks folks is that it's much more rigid, right? That it's more like, there it is. She's rigid. That the different locations, right, of like messaging about ideal identities, right? There you have it. Film, magazine, right? Advertise books. And you can see that she sees blame, disconnection, and fear as a big part of the shame box, right? And this is one of the worksheets. I'll send Ellie these worksheets so you guys will have these, right? So you can use these with your clients, right? So this is a worksheet on shame and identity. And I do this with clients from time to time, and we're gonna kind of imagine our own answers, right? And we're gonna put some of those answers out in the group as people feel comfortable, right? If you feel comfortable having that information out, but you don't want your name associated with it for the sake of the recording, you can throw it in the chat, right? Or you can just jump in and we'll be able to hear the audio, right? If we're going to kind of mentally fill this out in our heads, right? The shame category that we chose was work and money, right? And kind of the subset there is like working as a therapist, right? Or a clinician. And then we're going to look at ideal identities, right? And let's imagine that as a therapist, a lot of our ideal identities were mediated by grad school, okay? Our grad school cohort, those people we worked with at that agency that one time, right? Our own therapists, our own experiences in therapy, our own experiences with therapy that didn't work for us. There is, of course, media representations of therapists, I have never actually really seen The Sopranos, but I still think about what the Sopranos therapist does on an almost yearly basis. Like we've all seen representations of therapy in media, good therapy, bad therapy, right? Our friends, our families. I think also therapists have a different responsibility or an identity within their friend groups or communities as people who should be mentally healthy and relationally appropriate or kind, right? So the words, but they're a therapist, they should know, right? Like that happens, right? We are actually expected to be good at certain things, right? As part of our jobs. So ideal identities can be mediated by a whole bunch of our experiences, but ideal identities for therapists, and this is where, right, this might be a good time to throw something in the chat or jump in. I'll say that my ideal identities as a therapist, right, really overlap with my identity as an ADHDer, right? And you can see that some of my ideal identities are like to seem competent, right, which means responding to emails, which is something I'm not doing on the regular. Right, like it's to be competent, to come across as like smart and wise, right? Those are like some of my like ideal identities that I'm like kind of that are really important to me, right? For a number of reasons. Do you guys have, right, ideal identities that you want to throw in the chat or just unmute and, right, speak up some of those ideal identities?
In the chat, we have empathetic, competent, intelligent, patient, grounded, holistically healthy,
Oh, yeah.
more competent,
Yeah, it's weird. It's a big deal. It's a big deal.
congruent,
Congruent.
kind, safe, humorous, competent, good enough, someone who has their life and own mental health together, expert, warm and personable, calm, mentally and relationally healthy, and skilled. These are high bars.
These are really high bars. Yes.
I want to be perceived as grounded, consistent, safe. Ooh, here's a big one. Fully functioning adult.
What?
Yeah.
Good. That's a good goal. It's so hard. Oh, it's so hard. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Right. Ideal identities, what we want to be, right? Those are nice things.
Oh, I got to throw one more at you, Megan, because I think this one's good for the category competent, which means worth spending money on.
That's actually good. It's the apex of what we're going to be talking about. That's thank you. Thank you. Because that is a huge, it's such a big deal. Money, right? Money. It's such a big deal, right? When we're offering a service and also a healing, and it costs money, right? We'll talk about how that has, right? It goes so many directions, right? Out into fear and anxiety, right? And survival and all these things. But the shame slice is really interesting, right? We'll get into that in a second. Okay. Thank you for sharing, right? The ideal identities, right? Those are a big deal, right? Those are good identities, right? They're good identities, right? Let's talk about unwanted identities, right? Um, Unwanted identities you don't want to be perceived as. And this is perceived as, right? I don't want to be perceived as. My list is kind of like basically like the negative of my ideal identities. I don't want to be seen as incompetent. I think I don't want to be seen as silly. I think that's one of the things right? I don't want to be seen as silly, right? And I don't want to be perceived as not wise, right? Not understanding, right? If you guys feel comfortable, right, throwing in unwanted identities, right, into the chat or speaking up, right, this would be a good time to do.
So we have, I don't want to be perceived as incompetent, unprofessional, unstable, incongruent, relationally messy, uneducated, lazy, weird, unhelpful, dismissive, harmful, ignorant, harmful, a burden, weak, dangerous, untrustworthy, unsafe, harmful, unworthy, not good enough, unsupportive, harmful, emotionally unsure, or emotional and unsure, unworthy, not good enough, unsupportive, harmful. That's a big one. Impulsive, too professional, emotional. There's a double-edged sword there.
Yeah.
Yeah, cold, flawed, bumbling, disorganized, not competent, poor social skills, scattered, presumptuous, harmful, incompetent.
I hadn't thought about scattered and presumptuous, but that resonates. Um, if you care to, if you want to check in with your body as that list was just read out, right? That might be informative, right? Because you might have heard your own right shame identity read out, right? You might have put it in, and Ellie just read it out. You also heard a lot of other people's, right? And I feel that in like the top of my stomach, like that kind of like not nauseous feeling, but like a knot in the top of my stomach. My shoulders got tight, right? And it's such a different body feeling than the ideal identities list gave me, right? It's just a different feeling, right? We all have these, right? Unwanted identities, right? We all have these. When you work with your clients on this, right? You're going to see some prompts down below, right? Um, Looking at your list of unwanted identities, following questions. What do these perceptions mean to us? Why are they so unwanted, right? Where did the messages that fuel those identities come from, right? And then the nice bit here at the end. If you label me and reduce me to this list of unwanted identities, you will miss the opportunity to know that I'm complex and I have many strengths, including these. And I think that's one of the things about shame is that it is as we'll see, it's like a traumatic experience, and trauma tends to be tunnel vision, right? We see only the one thing, right? Shame has a tunnel vision, and we kind of reduce ourselves internally, right? We reduce down to our weaknesses, right? Or the things we don't like about ourselves, or the things that we fear will cause other people to reject us, right? Okay, so it's myopic, right? Right, shame resilience, and we're going to move into some of that, right? Is essentially about zooming back out, right? Um, all right, here we go. Shame drives two main tracks. I think that would be tracks now. I think she's referring to cassette tapes. I bought one at Goodwill recently to show my children an ancient artifact, right? I was like, here you go, this is a tape. They're like, what is this? I'm like, well, you didn't know what a CD was either. So I don't know. They're like, didn't you have it on your phone? I was like, shame drives two main tapes. Never good enough. Who do you think you are? Right, right. Never good enough. The stairway goes forever. Up, 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 up. Never good enough. Who do you think you are? Why did you think you could try that? Right? Who do you think you are? Okay. All right. And I can, there we go. The video bar is blocking my view of the text. There we go. What are shame triggers for therapists? And the reason I kind of wanted to bring this up, and like Ellie highlighted this for us, right? Somebody says good enough to spend money, right? Competent enough to spend money on, right? I wanted to bring this up in part because a lot of us, right, are either going through or worrying about or watching friends go through, right? A little bit of a softening of the therapy market for some, right? And in some places, right, in some specialties and right and such. So I wanted to look at that experience for us because it can be kind of stressful, right? Let's talk about how that might kind of expose us to some shame. So for our current market, right? I have a feeling that the some people are experiencing a reduction in their initial referrals, right? They're not getting as many right initial consults as they used to. Some of us are losing clients because our clients are feeling the economic pinch right now, and they can't afford therapy, right? I think I'm particularly focused on this because I'm in private pay, right? I don't take insurance, right? And so like the cost is high, right? And like if you're looking to save money, right, you can do that by cutting therapy, right? Right. And we're seeing, right, on a lot of therapist boards, right, occasional pop-up of people being like, is anybody else? Is anybody else having a hard time? Right. I think as far as shame goes, there's anxiety, certainly, right? And there's uncertainty, right? I think the way that this can go for shame, right? So shame is the intensely painful experience. I think there's something wrong with you, right? And that you're not deserving of connection, right? I think it's true, right? If you and I were selling squishmallows, it would feel different, right? If we were like, the market has softened for squishmallows, no one's buying them anymore. This is terrible, right? Like, I think we would have a different experience than the thing that we're actually like just doing for money, right? Is a personal connection with us and our clients, right? We are actually like presenting ourselves and saying, like, I have expertise, I have professionalism, I have training, and our relationship is going to be a big part of this work that we do together, right? And I think watching, right, like, right, the market slow down a little bit can give us a sense of not being good enough, right? There's something wrong with me and my website or my reputation or the people that I know and sending me referrals, right? So I want to highlight that as like a place where I think some of us are either experiencing or fearing the experience, right? Of shame, right? Of not feeling good enough, right? Um, we'll go into the shame resilience part here in a second, right? Um, for others, right? Other shame triggers for therapists, right? There's other ones, right? Some of them are getting fired. having, having clients fire you is terrible, right? And there isn't anything like more close to that experience of like, there's something wrong with me and they fired me because of it. I didn't come across as competent and they fired me because of it, right? I didn't come across as safe and they fired me because of it, right? That kind of, right, reduction to unwanted identities, right? People leave for a lot of reasons, but it can trigger that shame sense, right? Are there other triggers, shame triggers for therapists, right? And we'll kind of keep this a little brief and we'll move on to the shame resilience because this is heavy stuff, right? Right. Are there other shame triggers for therapists that you guys have experienced, right? Where that feeling of, right, not good enough, or who do you think you are? Oh, raising rates. Who do you think you are? Raise your rates. Who do you think you are? No one's going to pay that. Who do you think you are? That's real. Other shame triggers. What do you guys experience, right, as a shame trigger?
We have feeling powerlessness or feeling powerless.
Especially, I don't know the context of that, but if it's powerless to help, right, that sucks.
We've got a times two on that powerless part. I'm thinking too, when, we see like with that, like we see so much of what is burdening our clients is systemic, and the powerlessness in that sometimes feeling not good enough because someone isn't getting better. I'm out of tools. Yes, to the powerless to help. So many things out of control, out of our control. More clients dropping off, canceling, no showing, having more availability than everyone else at the agency.
Thing. That's the thing. Yeah. 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 never good enough. Who do you think you are? Right? Two main tracks, right? Shame identification. We're actually, right? Um, maybe in the middle of feeling some of these feelings right now, right? We might actually be living right now through shame experiences, right? As we're starting to like think about these things, right? Some information on identifying shame in the body. We process shame in the same place in our brain as we process physical pain. And we process it as a threat to survival. Okay. That's why the physical responses to shame are very similar to trauma responses. Time slows down, our pulses race, and so forth. Okay, right. It's serious stuff, right? And this comes to the like, we need connection, right? And this is the there's something wrong with me, and I don't deserve it, and I'll be disconnected, and I'll right be separate, right? Okay. So what we're not going to do is this worksheet. This one, right, is something I would encourage you to look over. It is great to do with clients. It is great to do in groups, right? It is great to work through on your own, right? This one, right, and we're going to get to lighter stuff here in a second, like in a hot second, right? But like the right, this one is really helpful for your own shame identification, right? So with like little kids, right, with like emotion identification, like you must be mad. You clenched up your fists and your heart was racing really fast and you had an angry face, right? You must be mad, right? This is the grown-up version of that for shame, right? And so when I first filled this out years and years and years ago, I was in the break room and I filled it out and it was so touchy for me. It was so hard for me that I remember not only folding it up, but hiding it underneath my purse just in case someone saw it, except for they wouldn't. But like right? That's what shame feels like. It feels like hiding, right? Shame grows in secrecy, right? Secrecy, right? In not speaking, right? Good worksheet to do with your clients. Okay, we're going to return to connection, right? Shame does merit buffering, right? If you have gone into feelings, right, that are brought up by, right, not good enough, right, money, connections, I've got more availability right now, I'm powerless, I don't need you, am I good enough, right? If we just went into that body, right, we return to connection. So this would be, right, the time to go back to that memory, right, or that experience, right, when you felt okay with somebody, right? You didn't feel like question or at fault. You didn't have to prove a whole lot, right? You were just kind of okay with somebody, right? You felt okay, right, with them. Maybe you gave that a name, right? Maybe you figured out where that sits in your body, right? So I'll invite you to take a deep breath and we'll take a few seconds just to remember that sense of connection. Good. All right, let's talk about shame resilience. Okay, let's do that. Okay. Empathy is the antidote to shame. Right? It's nice that there's an antidote, right? I'm looking at the time, so we'll kind of move through this at a bit of a clip, right? The opposite of experiencing shame is experiencing empathy, right? The opposite of shame is also, right, speaking, right? Shame is silence, right? Right? Shame resilience is speaking, right? A lot of us got this in grad school, right? This is the therapist 101, and it's still true. Empathy is the ability to see the world as another person sees it, right? To acknowledge that their experience is their truth, right? To withhold judgment of someone else's experience, right? Understand another person's feelings and to communicate your understanding of that person's feelings back to the person, right? So it's not only to receive, but it's to give back, right? It is, right, reflecting back, right? You have all seen this. You almost certainly have all seen this. I remember trotting this out for a family, and they're like, "Oh, we've all seen this." I'm like, "Everyone's seen this." This will be in the email, right? I'll send this off to Ellie, and she can forward this if you haven't. I've watched this 20 times. It's so good. It's very brief, helpful for clients, right? It's what empathy is and what it isn't, right? Very brief. And this is a sweet little worksheet, right? This is a sweet little worksheet. It's nice to do with clients. It's nice for yourself, right? It's nice even if you have this understanding, if you just hand it, you can hand it to your people, your spouse, your partner, your roommate, your people, right? Your family, right? If this is something where you're like, I just need you to have the manual. Here's the manual on how to provide empathy to me. To go through this briefly, right? This is understanding how you like to receive empathy and how you like to give it, right? So, right, one, when I share something personal and vulnerable, I really feel understood. It feels, right, I've seen responses like a relief, right? It feels good, it feels warm, it feels unusual, right? It feels, right? Okay. Next one, when I share something personal and vulnerable and I don't feel like anyone understands, I feel caught out, vulnerable, I freeze, I get angry, I try to explain, my mind races, whatever it is. When I share something personal and vulnerable, I like the person listening too, right? I myself have a very hard time, right, with like very soft, oh, noises, right? I have a very hard time for my own reasons, right? But I do want a response, right? And I do want to know that the other person heard and understood, right? So here's a nice list, right? Some people want eye contact. Some people don't want to be looked at, right? Some people want a hug. Some people want space, right? Some people want like, I'm gonna feel crazy if you don't say something right now, right? Some people are like, just listen, right? Right. Shh. And then this last one, this is nice. When someone shares something painful and personal with me, I, that's a vulnerable spot too, right? Worry about saying the wrong things, want to say something really comforting. I get nervous. I worry about not feeling anything. I'm supposed to be feeling something right now. I don't know, right? I want to fix it, right? This is a helpful worksheet, right? Do for yourself, do with your clients, right? How do I like to receive empathy, right? How do I like to give empathy, right? Reaching out and speaking shame, right? So shame dies in speaking, right? Lives in silence. It dies in speaking, right? The willingness to reach out, right? And describe your experience. That's a big part of it. Now, I had a hard time when I was working with shame and clients because I was, there's not a ton of like techniques, right, in this curriculum. There's some, but there's not a ton of techniques. And I was always trying to like be like, how can I help my clients reduce their shame? How can I help them reduce their shame? And it was like somebody who had glasses like on their head and was like, where is my glasses? Where are my glasses? Right. I'm like, oh, they're in therapy with me. They are able to speak their shame to me and I can be empathetic. Therapy is the shame reduction, right? That is actually the case, right? Therapy is a great place for shame reduction, right? It is a private, safe, controlled place to say the thing that you couldn't say before because you didn't have the right people around you, right? Or it wasn't safe, it didn't feel okay, right? And to have an empathetic response, right? Let's see. Okay. This is a little bit of both psychoed as well as, right, how it works, right? But for pivot a little bit here. For neurodiverse clients, right? For neurodiverse clients, this is an important part of this experience, right? We don't want to unload a shame story on just anyone, right? We need to find people who are worthy of hearing our story, people who can bear the weight of our story, who have a relationship with us, right? Right, just briefly, right? Teaching our clients, right, about, right, neuroception, about safety, about a relationship, about, right, how heavy, large, private, right, a shame story is, right? And what degree of closeness, right? You need to have to somebody to give a certain degree of story, right? That's good education, right? And it's good shame resilience work in session, is to give people the tools to tell the right story to the right person, right? Okay. Social media. This is actually, right, so a homework for clients I'll sometimes give them is, right, on your favorite social media platform, find someone who's been through what you've been through. Notice what you think, feel, and do afterwards, and we'll discuss it next week. The internet. You can find your experience online. You can, like, to just the nearest degree. It is incredible. And not feeling alone, right, is a big part of shame reduction, right? Even if you don't speak your own experience, knowing that it exists in somebody else is a big deal, right? It's a big deal. Let me check the time real quick. We'll come up on Q&A here in a second. So let's kind of wrap up. Who can therapists reach out to when they are in shame, and how can therapists speak shame? Right. So this is actually, like, it's kind of a double-edged sword here, sort of. I think compared to, like, I don't know, lawyers, I don't actually know. I just assume that there are professions where vulnerability about your feelings of shame are less okay. Right. I think there are professions where you just shouldn't and can't, and you just pretend that you are fine and that you didn't make any mistakes and you don't feel weird about it, and that you are just you're all your ideal identities all the time, and if there's any weakness, you got to go hide it, right? I think there are professions that have that in spades, right? A beloved graduate school professor who recently passed away, right? So I'm kind of happy to speak Lane Gerber's name, right, in a presentation. So year after his memorial, but he taught a lot on shame, and I think he had a lot of overlap with the medical profession. I think his impression was that in medicine, right, I think we're taught, right, I think folks are taught as medical students to be omniscient, right, and not make mistakes, and that there is a lot of hiding, right, and a lot of shame, right, around, right, vulnerabilities, right. Who can therapists reach out to when they are in shame? Some of you are in really lovely, squishy, gorgeous, adorable group practices where you can lean into the doorway of the other person who also doesn't want to write their notes and distract each other, right? And say, I just had this thing. I feel incompetent. I worry that I just did harm. I think they might be leaving me for another therapist. I don't feel good enough, right? And we're a field that kind of, like, validates that expression, right? We're like, I get it, right? Like, some of, like, the niceness of, like, being around other therapists is this. We're actually trained to do this. We do this for each other, right? Some of us are in private practice and can't lean into anybody's doorway, right? And we may not have people in our lives who, like, understand this, and we may not have people in our lives who can catch the, like, the significance and nuance of the stuff that we go through in our fields. Right? Who do you guys, right? Where do you guys find places as therapists, right, to right, speak shame? Right? You know, where do you find, is it online, right? Is it with a buddy, right, that you message, right, or you call, right? Is it a supervisor, right? Is it ongoing consultation, right? Is it, like, and PS, I'm in private practice and would love to know your guys' answers. Like, who do you speak shame to, right? How do you reach out when you are in shame as a therapist, right?
So in the chat, we have this group, we have online neurodivergent communities. And then something that I put in the chat was that as a neurodivergent therapist, I think I actually entered the field over trusting people's intentions and having to learn to be more careful about who to share things with or who to consult with within the field.
Yeah. No, I get that. I've been thinking a lot about neurodivergence and the assumption of altruism, right? I think the projection of altruism, I think a lot of us have very kind of, I think our ideals like are very in front of our eyes, right? And I think they are um, integrated into our thoughts, and our thoughts are integrated into our behaviors in a really strong way. And so I think the altruism that we carry, which is like do the right thing, right? Be cautious of doing the wrong thing, right? Be good to other people, right? Have good intentions towards other people, right? I think that's a really strong theme within neurodiversity, right? And not realizing that other people are not running around with that same orientation, right? Right? Or not running around with the same level of vulnerability, right? Like it's tricky, right? It can cause shame on its own, right? If you feel like you've kind of shared more than the other person was willing to handle.
Mm. I'm seeing in the chat lots of themes of ways people have found neurodivergent affirming people. That seems like an important piece with the shame, either online, in therapy, in a close colleague, or trusted supervisor.
Good, good, good. All right, cool. Let's wrap up here, right? I'm going to talk very fast, which as an ADHDer, I am qualified to do. Right. So here we go. All right. There's the idea there. Never good enough. Who do you think you are? I'm going to try to hand over my spidey senses to mention Spider-Man for 2 times in a presentation here. My spidey senses about when I think a client's in shame, as different from trauma, right? There's also trauma shame, right? That's a whole thing. But like as different from trauma, as different from dissociation, is different from like depression, is different from, okay. I tend to look for this. This is strategies of disconnection, right? I tend to look for this in their recountings of their relationships, right? What we do when we feel shame, we disconnect, right? We feel disconnected. We're worried about disconnection. So we either move away, we silence ourselves, keep our secrets, and disappear. Okay, right? We move towards, we people please in response to shame. Okay, what do you need? I'll do it, right? Okay, masking, right? Masking. Moving against, we use shame and aggression to fight shame and aggression, right? Happens too, right? Happens too. Okay, so I look for that in my client stories of their interactions with others. And then, right, these are some of my tells. These are mine, right? So recognizing shame in session, sometimes it does look a little dissociative, right? Sometimes it does look like people kind of like go away for a little bit, right? Sometimes they're looking down, they're not talking. I also see blaming others and defensiveness, right? There's a rich subject there in narcissism and shame, right? That essentially that narcissism is made out of shame, right? That's what it is, right? Right. So blaming others and defensiveness, they're always in they're okay, right? So blaming others, unrealistically high standards for self and others, never good enough. Who do you think you are, right? And best worst, right? I'm the best. I'm the worst. I'm the best. This happened all the time in eating disorder treatment, right? Those were people who were striving to be the best as far as like skinniness goes, right? Or like the physical appearance, right? These people also often had bests in mind for academics and things like that, right? And there was a like, there's just this, that's shame, right? I'm the best or I'm the worst. That's shame, right? That's not high achieving. That's not because I want to. That's shame, right? That's I'm not good enough and I won't be accepted unless let's skip over self-compassion. Who needs that? But there's self-compassion is a part of right shame resilience, right? Let's get to Q&A, and I'm going to cut the PowerPoint now, right? If I can remember how. There we go. How do we? There, stop share. There we go. Maybe. There we go. There's your faces. There's your faces. All right. All right. Questions, right? I have not been able to see the chat this whole time. I don't know what's there at all. What questions might you guys have?
I haven't seen a question in the chat yet, but I did fail to speak out one of the comments that I thought was probably relevant to a lot of us. Somebody said that 2 to 3 years ago, they stood out as knowledgeable about neurodiversity. And last month, they looked at a directory where they're listed as a neurodivergent affirming provider. And there are now 20,000 plus practitioners claiming to be specialists in neurodivergence.
Yeah. Yeah. Think about that sometime. It is a growing field, right? I think some of us, right, we were born in, but like we like started working with neurodiversity before it was cool, and it's becoming cool, right? And it is now very like out there, right? And so if you had that presentation, if you had that like niche knowledge, if you were the one, right, like there's just more ones out there, right? It's yes. Questions, more questions. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm new here. This is my first time with y'all, and just to introduce myself, I'm Clara, she, her, and very grateful to be in this space. It feels like a lot that you had just shared, Megan, really resonates with what has been going on with some of my clients, with myself, with many things. And I don't know if I necessarily have a question, but it's kind of a statement, and I'm curious, like reflections or thoughts from you or others. Um, but shame is such a huge thing that I've noticed coming up with many like neurodivergent teams and like identity development and all of these things. And like, what's the relationship, I'm wondering, kind of between shame and also like masking themselves, and then also like around like coping strategies that they do to protect themselves, like how to navigate the nuances and complexity of that, because it feels so interconnected.
It's so interconnected.
Yeah.
Yes. It's probably 3 books, right?
Sure.
um, actually, that might be actually Ellie, time-wise, it might be a great place to open up to the folks here about right people's experience or understanding of the interconnection between shame and masking, right? But I don't know how much time we have.
How about we, in the next 5 to 10 minutes, wrap up Q&A that is appropriate for recording. And when we want to move over to consulting more confidential things, I'll turn video off.
Okay. Sounds good. Yeah, I would love to have people comment on right shame and masking, because that is actually like that's right. That's where it's at, right? Like as far as neurodivergence and shame, right? Which is the like, right? If shame is I'm afraid something's wrong with me, right? And will like make me unworthy of connection, right? That mediating set of skills, which is masking, which is the like, who are other people? Who am I, right? And I've got this set of skills in between, right, to kind of mediate between me and them, right? Like a location of shame, like none other. Are there people who have right seen that connection, right? Kind of have an understanding of how masking and shame go together?
Clara, when you asked that question, I thought about the study and I can't remember exactly when or where it was done. So if somebody has that information on the top of their head, yell it out. But the study that was done that showed the correlation between high masking femmes and suicidality being directly correlated, which I think probably says something about the shame experience. And where I've seen a shift in clients is when masking is connected to shame, like I need to cover up who I am or people will find out that I'm bad, that it's very burdensome. But at some point when that shame starts to shift, it can become a tool. Like I'm going to put on my mask to go get this task done because systems are silly, and then take it off, you know?
That makes sense. And like supporting clients and like knowing how to like discern that and developing that awareness and skill. Yeah.
Thank you, Zach. I knew I could count on you. Zach has put the study in the chat. That was fast.
I don't think it was the same study, but it was one that found something very similar.
Anybody else on masking and shame, right? Or working with clients and masking and shame?
I think from like just my quick thoughts on like a treatment perspective of how do we go about approaching that is that I tend to work from an IFS parts kind of place, right? And so all exiled parts in that model, the down below pieces are always about some version of shame, disconnection, loneliness, right? Like those are always where almost always the burdens come back to. And so then masking is just a protective behavior, protecting from that shame, right? And so if we think about that conceptually, if we want to be able to stop having to do that protective behavior, we have to go to that shame and take a look at it and process or shift if it's based on beliefs about myself, shift, redefine, all of those things. So I think that's where often therapeutically it starts with just an introduction of the neurodivergent, identity and paradigm, so that you're giving somebody an alternative to whatever belief systems they already had, right? Before I have the idea of neurodiversity, I am just wrong. And so now that I realize neurodiversity is natural, the issue isn't that I am bad. The issue is about neuronormative expectations, and that I don't naturally follow these neuronormative expectations. I mean, essentially, we're making neuronormativity the enemy, to summarize, right? And then I'm not. So then I think that the shift that I see for folks is we move from deciding, most people, I think sometimes in our neurodivergent friendly world, we also push masking or like unmasking way too much that isn't realistic, right? Like it is not safe in our society in certain spaces for us to be, because we will feel shame and we will be shamed by others if we don't. And so I really like to frame it sometimes about like percentages and, that idea of unmasking, of identifying where can I feel safe to unmask, where is it necessary, where do parts of me feel like I must, continue to hold some level, but can I even shift little bits of it? So maybe I have to act a certain way, but can I wear clothes that are more comfortable and just like reduce a tiny bit of it in one particular way? Or is there one coworker that I can kind of be myself around for a few minutes each day? So any reduction in being realistic with what feels okay for that person. Often over time, people will start to realize like these environments aren't suiting me and I'm going to go find different environments. But that's not, sometimes I think we're so flippant about, especially people who have done that work, we're so flippant about like, it's so great once you unmask and you find your people. Like it takes a long time to get through all of those layers before we can get there. So for me, that's kind of like the therapeutic approach around that is, being thoughtful and, what does feel safe right now in terms of unmasking after I've done some of that shame work. And the shift becomes more of kind of, I think Ellie referenced this a little bit before, but that shift becomes more of like the, this is a neuronormative expectation thing. And it still stinks to, have issues because of those differences, but I don't have to be left with I am bad as the option. The problem here, like especially around communication things, I think is a good example of that, right? Like I know for myself, I've done a lot of work. A few months ago, I had a time when I overshared and misread like a new professional contact kind of thing. Like the person asked me a question and I engaged. I thought that was an invitation to engage in conversation. I still don't think I really misread that. But then I started that conversation, probably went a little bit more. But then there was like, I have to go, not like a very abrupt shutdown. And, in the past, that would have been like a major RSD reaction for me and all of those things. Instead, this time, I was just like, apparently I misread this. Like, ooh, that kind of sucks, right? Like, is where I was able to be at because I've done a lot of that shame processing. And like, it still sucks when those things happen, but I'm not left with like, I am a horrible human and all of those other kind of thoughts. And so I think that's the shift that can happen. But I also think it's important for us to be realistic about Like sometimes I think folks are over positive of like, you'll find your people and it'll all be okay. Like, but it's not realistic. We live in a world where there's still plenty of neuronormative expectations. And so I'm gonna have to interact with folks who don't get me and aren't accepting. And how do I minimize the shame that comes from that continual situation as well?
That's a big deal. I tend to be very kind of black and white with my ideas, right? Especially early on. And the idea of like nobody should have to mask became the idea, right? And then there was it's actually there's times where it's safety wise, right? Or just cross-cultural communication wise, right? I come from a very neurodiverse family, right? And there was just cross-cultural communication that had to happen between family culture and the outside world. Like, it would just be like, someone needs to translate for us, right? We have a very compact neurodiverse culture in our family, and now we're going to have to translate that out, right? It is, right? Yeah, communication. Great. Let's see, and we're coming up on the time before we switch to consultation. So thank you guys, right, for your time, right, and for everything that went in the chat, and for sharing back and forth, right. It helps me. That list of unwanted identities helps me, right? You incidentally added a few to my list. I was like, good, I don't want those identities either. I didn't realize I didn't want those, but like, it's helpful, right? Like, it's helpful for me to hear, right? Not alone, right? Going through the same sorts of things, right? Going through the same sorts of things. All right, so thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Megan. Thank you for facilitating this space. This was really great.